Aphorism 16. There are still harmless self-observers who believe immediate certainties exist. For example, I think, or, as was Schopenhauer's superstition, I will, as though knowledge here had hold of its object pure and naked as thing in itself, and no justification occurred either on the side of the subject or on the side of the object. But I still reiterate 100 times that immediate certainty, like absolute knowledge, in thing in itself, contains a contradictio in objecto. We really ought to get free from the seduction of words. Let the people believe that knowledge is not total knowledge, but the philosopher must say to himself, when I analyze the events expressed in the sentence, I think, I acquire a series of rash exertions which are difficult, perhaps impossible to prove. For example, that it is I who think, that it has to be something at all which thinks, that thinking is an activity, an operation on the part of an entity, thought of a cause, and that I exist. Finally, that what is designated by thinking has already been determined, that I know what thinking is. For if I had not already decided that matter within myself, but why standard could I determine that what is happening is not perhaps willing or feeling? Enough. This, I think, presupposes that I compare my present state with other known states of myself in order to determine what it is on account of this retrospective connection with other knowledge. At any rate, it possesses no immediate certainty for me. In place of that immediate certainty, in which the people may believe in the present case, the philosopher acquires in this way a series of metaphysical questions, true questions of conscience for the intellect, namely, whence do I take the concept thinking? Why do I believe in cause and effect? What gives me the right to speak of an I, and even of an I as case, and finally, an I of case of thoughts? Whoever feels able to answer these metaphysical questions straight away with an appeal to a sort of intuitive knowledge, as he does say to himself, I think and know that this at least is true, actual, and certain, will find a philosopher today ready with a smile and two question marks. My dear sir, the philosopher will perhaps give him to understand it is improbable. You are not mistaken, but why do you want the truth at all? Aphorism 17. As for the superstitions of the logicians, I shall never tire of underlining a concise fact which these superstitious people are loath to admit, namely that a thought comes when it wants to come, when it wants the I to arrive, so that it is a falsification of the facts to say the subject, I, is the condition of the predicate think. It thinks, but that this little it is precisely that famous old I is, to put it mildly, only an assumption, an assertion, and above all, not an immediate certainty. For even with this it thinks, one has already gone too far. This it already contains an interpretation of the event. It does not belong to the event itself. The interference here is in accordance with the habit of grammar. Inactivity is still thinking. To every inactivity pertains one who acts. Consequently, it was more or less in accordance with the same scheme that the older atomism sought in addition to the force which acts, that little lump of matter in which it resides, out of which it acts, the atom. More rigorous minds at last learn to get along without this residuum of earth, and perhaps we and the logicians as well will one day accustom ourselves to getting along without that little I, which is what the most honest it has evaporated into. Aphorism 18. It is certainly not the least charm of a theory that it is refutable. It is with precisely this charm that it entices subtler minds. It seems that the 100 times refuted theory of free will owes its continued existence to this charm alone. Again and again, there comes along someone who feels he is strong enough to refute it. Welcome, everyone, to a surprised episode on a Saturday, because the guest of today is the same as Thursday. We negotiated to have an episode 2 or round 2 with Nietzsche, and it's the one and sole survivor, Fouad.
What's going on, guys? Glad to be here, Gregory. I'm ready to do another round. Get my mind blown once again.
Welcome again. And
Thank you.
hey, I said this after the first episode with them, that I was relieving myself from the agony, emotions, and spontaneity of reading Nietzsche and the dialogue, because when reading Nietzsche, it's crucial to think at his level and sometimes underneath his level to the physical world, because there's times where he'll branch off to a mystical and metaphysical realm, but he'll drag those ideas into reality, but not say it in front of us, because he'll toy and play with our emotions and how we disagree with him or agree with him, etc., etc.
Interesting.
And it affected you after.
Oh, for sure. I think I was listening to a podcast I think yesterday, and they were talking. Nietzsche came up, and they're talking about how he likes to troll people in his writings, for sure.
With everybody, and including himself, because he's a solitary person, and he uses his solitary state as a source of humor. He wrote to one of his colleagues in Germany, because he was in Switzerland in the Stosmarie mountain range in the Swiss Alps, and he said, "I am the hermit of Stosmarie," which is a foreshadowing to Zarathustra of himself in solitude for 10 years straight before he descends to the masses, etc., etc.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And today, from first reading, it appears as, oh, it's simple to read as it could be, but it's Nietzsche. You can't simply read and dive into the waters that he's swimming in, but if you can challenge and keep up the pace with him in these treacherous, sometimes alleviating and cold water. First, his first concern is with these self-observers, he says in air quotes, who believe in immediate certainties. And he has an example for an immediate certainty of, I think. And he includes the Schopenhauerian version of I think to I will. As he would say, as Schopenhauer's superstition, I will. Schopenhauer's will is linked with the pain and suffrage of reality, that the will continues to function, thrive, and act for survival. In Schopenhauer's main work, The World as Will and Representation, and his devout Kantianism, because he saw Kant as a father to him. The will, as I said, it continues to thrive and function and survive. Schopenhauer, while these immediate and temporal thriving functionings and pleasures happen, they don't alleviate the pain. But the true negation of the will is asceticism, or having an ascetic style of life where you renounce, deny worldly pleasures, including the values in life and inside your body, suffocating the power and stopping the will to function itself. And Nietzsche says, well, that's all fine and dandy, but that's another form of the will to power. A degraded and laughable form of the will to power, but it's still a value in the will to power. And he denies of Schopenhauer's will to life, as Schopenhauer himself said. And the will to life predated Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. And Nietzsche would say that's a will to existence. But with that will to existence, it's not what Nietzsche thought was, and you've heard the quote, "the survival of the fittest." He connected that phrase to Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin didn't create that statement. Herbert Spencer did. And Herbert Spencer agreed with self-preservation as the number one motive for the species to continue, while Darwin disagreed with self-preservation because he thought natural selection, as the idea implies, where how life naturally selects the highest form of sense and genetics possible for it to continue, not as preserving its species, but evolving its species, while at the same time duplicating other species. And Nietzsche thought, whoa, if we're duplicating people, that means we're creating and generating weak wills after weak wills for generations. We're creating weak people from weakness. That was his number one concern.
Mm-hmm.
He had multiple concerns, but weakness was his number one concern after writing Zarathustra. So that's Schopenhauer's will, that it's a functional thriving to survive, and that simple pleasures stop the pain briefly before pain continues to happen again until we die. Hence his pessimistic view of life, and a confession of what Schopenhauer's life is, that he's jealous of not solely of other people, but of himself, that he has these sexual drives, because he wrote the world as will and representation at the age of 26. But we associate the pessimistic old man with his old photo from the 1860s and 70s.
Interesting.
So yes.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Was it? I think you mentioned earlier that to write off, the material world or worldly things. That is, Nietzsche believes that's still a will, still part of the will to power. Is that what you said earlier? Okay. So I guess correct me if I'm wrong. So writing things off is still, you're willing that to happen, even though, so it's not a negation of will, it is still an expression of will.
A form of your will to it's a form of will to power that you acted on yourself, that you control yourself while denying worldly value, power, and pleasure that life has for you.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So it's still a will to power. Okay. It's in a almost a inverse of kind of direction instead of like outwards.
Yes. An internalization, etc., etc.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll continue this with Hegel and Kant and this aphorism too. And he continues saying, as though knowledge were held as objectively pure and naked as the thing in itself, and no falsification or judgment could occur on the side of the subject and of the object itself. And he says again and again 100 times that immediate certainty, like absolute knowledge, and thing in itself, are contradicto and objecto, or contradiction in terms or adjectives. absolute knowledge, why is he saying there are contradictions in themselves or in terms? Absolute knowledge is tied with Georg Hegel, one of the fathers of German idealism, with pitiful writing style. You could, if you read him, you'd think you had a stroke in the first 5 sentences. That's his writing style. Some people said, "Oh, he wrote poorly. He wrote in dim light, etc., etc." That was his writing style.
Okay.
It wasn't. It wasn't his poor sight or the lack of light in his room.
So you're saying there's like a beware kind of warning when you read him. You might have a stroke yourself or develop some mental health, something like that.
You'll be hospitalized if you read.
Oh, good to know.
Well, with the absolute knowledge is there's a process of this contradiction in itself, because say one example that X is true, that X is believing that X is true, and that there's either no truth or false or justified or unjustified inside this objectivity of this X, but it's absolute outside the true, false, justified, unjustified duality. And while this objectivity is is implied as knowledge, but inside that knowledge is a degree of certainty, awareness, or acceptance of newer and fresher evidence or skepticism, and that's in 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 modernity, it's a common view where knowledge is this source of skepticism or degree of certainty, etc., etc. And if you add reason to it, it's a source of joy and beauty and justice to receive this reason as evident. And if you approach, not unwillingly or no willingly approach people and say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" But in everybody's life, if you acted on something that was to them right or wrong, air quoting, they'll say, "Why did you do this?" They're seeking a source of reason, but in reality, to Nietzsche, in reality, you're describing what happened, and people are testing you to see if you're guilty or not, and shame, punish slash retaliate on you for this guilty or non-guilty scenario.
That's really on point in a way, you know, like from like personal experience. I'm sure it sounds like this obviously happens to everybody, but like if you do something and someone asks you why'd you do it, it does definitely, you know, it can create that little bit of anxiousness, like, oh shit, like that you may have done something wrong or shameful or something like that. I like that.
Mm-hmm. And Nietzsche entirely disagrees with this absolute knowledge, and including immediate certainty, because he said, "Let the people believe this knowledge as total knowledge, but the philosopher must say to himself, when I analyze the event expressed in the sentence, I think I acquire a series of rash assertions or serious statements, which are difficult, perhaps impossible to prove. For example, that it is I who think, that it has to be something at all which wants to think, that thinking is a activity, an operation on the part of the entity thought as a cause, that I exists and which designates the thinking." And he's critiquing the deterministic duality of cause and effect with I and thinking, plus ridiculing Rene Descartes, his famous quote, "I think, therefore I am." He was the first. He's a rationalist and dualist. Dualist is separation of mind and body. At the time, it was the mind was the soul slash spirit, so it was separation of soul and body. He was a rationalist to heart, of rationally skeptical, rationally being skeptic of the body. So while I'm skeptical of my senses, thinking I can't be skeptical of. So I am thinking. Nietzsche would say, is that the best you can do? Only think. Because if you only think, there's nothing fluid or functional of you, but only your thinking. And if you're sitting, you're stagnating your thinking. Why don't you get up and walk and have a fluid and functional life? Your thoughts on that?
Just wrapping my brain around it for a second. Okay, so he's critiquing like I'm an entity, therefore I think, and that is a critique. Like he's critiquing that just because you are an entity doesn't mean that you have to think, or there is a need to think, or because you are something doesn't mean that you just thinking comes from that or something like that. A little confused.
He's ridiculing the sense of as thinking as a true source of knowledge, and that you're truly yourself because you think, and that you're not skeptical of this thinking. And he's saying, oh, are you only limited to that, just thinking? Then would you rather not be a person of action? Well, not a person of action, but a person who creates, becomes this, and that, and loves their life, but you would rather be at the level of just thinking, like the rest of these people.
Oh, I see. Okay, so I'm just thinking about creativity. It's not necessarily something you rationally think about. It kind of comes to you like as inspiration. Is that is almost like maybe an impulse? Maybe that's just something that just kind of comes out of you or into you.
Mm-hmm. It's willed inside you, as Nietzsche in Aphorism 13, with the will to power. The will is a collection of not entities, but forces, passions, thoughts, desires, etc., competing one another for the psyche to move the person forward or life forward. And with this will, Nietzsche's will, and not Schopenhauer's will, it's condemning the view of Descartes, Hegel, and Kant of their will, and including Schopenhauer's will, that is that thinking is the limited point of humanity, and for this limited point, you've created judgment, and from creating judgment, you've separated you've separated society and established a gulf between what people are and what people aren't, and they become skeptics of their body, and now they think that who they truly are based on the immediate certainty or absolute knowledge of, oh, so I think that's who I truly am.
Oh, I see. Okay. I think I understand where he's coming from with that. Okay, so it creates like this over indulgence of rational thought, and that becomes people's identity. So how you feel in your body is nothing more than just, sensation or nerves firing, and that's not something to really take as serious.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's because the impulses are irrational to them, and they turn their cheek from those impulses to become a rational being, and they've coined the term that humans are rational beings. And I'd say in the eyes of who?
Right. That's a good question. Good question. I was also thinking about, about like flow state, or when you're in the zone, like you're really just dialed in, where you have this feeling of, you're not even thinking at all. You're just doing, almost like you're aware. You're just kind of awareness and just doing something. And
I'm a great example. Drumming. When
right.
you're drumming, it's just unconscious movement, and at the same time, you don't realize the flaws in the unconscious movement because you think that are correct. But at the same time, you're not concerned if they're correct or not.
Right. So when you're in that kind of place, you're not concerned about if you're not concerned about the flaws. Maybe they don't actually matter. Like, does it matter if they're flaws? Maybe it gives it a uniqueness to your playing.
To your style. And if you're covering a song, which I cover every day for practicing in my band, songs I cover, yes, there's flaws inside them, but well, there's flaws that I play in the song because I'm not precise every time. But while I'm not playing at a precise rhythm, I improvise, and it comes twofold again.
Oh, interesting. And you could see that from like someone from a rat who really holds that idea that humans are a rational being, that you not performing the song perfectly in a way is that you're being irrational. And to someone who is more like, who doesn't hold that belief as strongly, or maybe not as at all, let's say, that's like you're just being creative, or you're adding your own style to it, like you said.
And I challenge the people who say who say that humans are rational. You play an instrument and create your flaws and your irrational uh, issues with it, and
Mm,
see where the jealousy, envy comes from.
right. Right. Yeah, no, it's a good point.
To continue forward with while he's seeing that this is a contradiction in terms, he says one should get free from this seduction of words. They're appealing words, as we said before, with synthetic judgments a priori. That's an intriguing word or statement to some people. But, as Nietzsche said, are they necessary?
Mm.
Including the thing in itself, another uh, criticism of Kant. Now, the thing in itself creates an issue that's not simple to simplify than the absolute knowledge, where X is X because of its objective immediate certainty, outside of, well, is it true, false, justified, or unjustified? With the thing in itself, it its definition its definition is its answer. That's the issue. Because the definition of the thing in itself is what's left after detaching every aspect of a object or subject, if we use these uh pointless terms, but to communicate we use these terms. Um we detach everything, and what's left is the a thing in itself that's unknowable or can't be knowable. Thus, the definition of the thing in itself is its answer. So every time you say, what is the thing in itself? Well, simply that. Its definition. Everything detached from it. What's left is nothing. And from this nothingness, it creates an absence of frustration, or an absence of certainty to frustration. Because let's say for example, the thing in itself causes us cause us to perceive it as the thing as it appears to be, in a mere appearance. Another issue with this note that is that it has a cause of power, and with that it fails at what the definition or the seeking and arriving at the thing in itself is, because it implies it implies a duality of cause and effect, or a deterministic process where if it's the thing that it appears to be versus and the thing in themselves, what caused it first, and what's the the end result, aka a teleological process in itself. Why are we discussing appearances if it's nothing that appears? Because we can't speak of things in themselves. But if an appearance is an appearance of something that doesn't appear, there's zero sense nor using our time to discuss appearances itself. It's a contradiction in itself first, and idealism. Why is it a contradiction and a contradiction in idealism? Because knowledge isn't knowledge of appearance and representations, or everything that's necessary to distort and falsify reality to the result of its source. That's not knowledge in a Nietzschean sense, nor truth. Truth is the beliefs that correspond in reality under some description, while knowledge consists of these justified truths under some description, but are limited from our cognition or sight and senses and our abilities/passions. That's Nietzsche's perspectivalism. Your thoughts?
Wow. A little difficult to follow along there. So you were saying if you're talking about something that doesn't have an appearance, that it's kind of useless to, like an abstract concept. You're trying to basically paint it as something when it doesn't actually have a form. Is that what is that what he's kind of saying? I don't know.
Not Nietzsche himself, but Kant, where he's running around this idea of this metaphysics and not with no answer of it. It leaves a void of nothingness as the answer of the thing in itself.
Okay. Yeah, that's
one material example is a phone. You can describe and detach every aspect of a phone, say its size, its weight, the material inside of it, the wiring, metal, lenses, glass, etc., and its function. You're left with nothing, and Kant says, oh, that nothingness is the thing in itself. It doesn't appear, it's unknowable, and it's the phenomena.
Right, okay. I see what you're saying. So he's going to be like I say, the phone. Most people would say, well, it's a phone. It has a purpose. It does something. That's its definition probably to most people, if you were to ask them.
Mm-hmm.
So Kant goes beyond that in a certain sense that he will, if you start breaking it down and stuff, it's unknowable. Which I guess it is a contradiction. So like, what do you mean it's unknowable? Like, it's almost, I guess it's reducing it so far that it's almost meaningless to even go to that point in a certain sense. Like, what is the utility of leaving it at nothing or it being unknowable?
And Nietzsche's tying this with the modern science of his time and after by comparing the thing in itself to atoms and scientists downgrading humans to mere atoms or monkeys.
Right.
And saying, if you detach all these aspects and attributes of a human, you're left with this atom or this source of monkey, and if you do the same thing to them, you're left with nothing. And I'd say again, why are we concerned with the appearance of something that doesn't appear? There's no sense of talking and discussing of something that doesn't appear.
Okay. I think I see what you're saying. Yeah, I guess like what is the point of discussing about those things at that point? Doesn't really where does it lead to?
And he attributes that to thinking with the existence of I. previously on some aphorisms before 16, he's saying that to the philosopher, it's a unconscious memoir or confession on them to manipulate, aim, and control these people with their rational philosophy and rationalizing their journey in the same path that they rationalize their journey from their philosophy and their moral duties or edifices. And he has this process of disembowling or eviscerating these philosophers, including the idealists, but people before him and after him. We can decipher these people today. One example, Jordan Peterson, he continues to misconcept what Nietzsche said of God is dead. He thought Nietzsche lamented and was sorrowful and mourning that people were getting rid of morality and the sense of community from the source of God. That's a confession of Jordan Peterson and his Christian worldview that he misinterpreted what Nietzsche was saying. Nietzsche realized that the void, after ridding and disposing of religion or a god, not solely the Christian God. In Zarathustra, he said, now we got rid of the Christian God, it's time to get rid of all gods.
I see.
Not solely in religion, not in religion, but in science, philosophy, art, and if you add a fifth one, technology, etc., etc.
Interesting. Okay, so what comes to mind with the Jordan Peterson example and let's say like God, that the God is also kind of the same point that you get in religion as, let's say, the rational thinkers get, where you get to this, like the atom and then something that's unknowable. It is like, it's kind of a hard roadblock. It's just, you can't know it. So it creates this kind of, I guess, boundary, a net to encapsulate other thinkers or philosophers.
Mm-hmm. And with these seduction of words, as Nietzsche said, and in saying earlier with Aphorism 10 that there's this slyness and problem that is set upon Europe or the world today, that it would have people to think and perk up their ears every time they heard in the background of a will to truth, but they don't use it in other words. Will to truth is, to say again, a dispassionate, objective, and absolute seeking of truth or obsession with it. But in another sense, it's another form of the will to power, but in a dispassionate and serious / impersonal way.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Go ahead.
So while the philosophers are confessing their concerns on paper, their true motives is to something beyond this mere father of knowledge, but another impulse of controlling. And while preserving their power or their will to power / sanity to the degree of moral, amoral comprehension or miscomprehension, and understanding or misunderstanding on the part of the reader reading the people. Well, the reader reading the work.
Okay. So it's a form of power that they're kind of playing. And is
Mm-hmm.
it, so it's a confession of, let's say, the rational thinker, that they're either, I guess, afraid or have some kind of fear that expressing themselves through just acting, or, you through the body too, is, I guess, maybe it's dangerous to them or something like that, on a, underneath the surface to them. They're not being, so they're trying to create kind of make people like themselves in a certain sense,
while preserving the reputation and not worse it.
preserving their own reputation or the idea or
Their reputation.
their reputation. Okay. Yeah, you kind of see that today with, well, you hear that in a lot of different areas of science and stuff, like a lot of established, scholars
Mhm.
and scientists and whatnot. They will shoot down, different ideas that, they would say there's no evidence for that. Doesn't make any sense. Why even speculate or, go down that road? There's no substantial, data about it, so it's useless.
And Nietzsche would add to what you're saying is, for I already not decide that matter within myself, by what standard could I determine that what is happening is not perhaps willing or feeling, aka external and internal will that is affecting you.
Interesting. Okay.
And he's tolerated this by saying, enough, I think, presupposes that I compare my present state with other states of myself in order to determine what it is on account of this retrospective connection with other knowledge. At any rate, it possesses no immediate certainty with myself, aka the system of mnemonics or memory. When you're presented or worried and anxious while presented a situation or another experience or something unknown and unfamiliar with you, people begin to philosophize, question, and push this unknown till their death.
I see.
And upon their deathbed, they'll begin regretting poignancy and being gloomy to them, well, pitying, gloomying, and condemning themselves that they didn't act upon that emotion, this sensual and physiological sense of the emotion, which is not pathological in the sense of the philosopher saying that these irrational senses are pathological and should be disposed or rid of. For my philosophy is an antidote to your disease. In reality, you're worsening the disease with your quote unquote antidote.
Right. Yeah. Because you would think about it, like if you were to, do what they're doing, you're basically using philosophy or thinking to try to control that emotion or whatever that unknown that is scaring you, essentially. So they're basically analyzing it, and by analyzing it, they're pushing themselves away from the thing that's kind of scares them or is beckoning them. Because if they went into it went into the emotion, went into that impulse,
Mm-hmm.
they would
And
go ahead.
continue.
I was gonna say, if they actually went kind of through with the emotion they're feeling or the impulse, they would get a sort of answer, understanding that they're at the end of their life that they're regretting that they kind of never embarked on to find out.
Yes. While you were saying that, I remembered a section in Twilight of the Idols named the Four Great Errors, and one of the errors is imaginary causes, where an event appears or unfolds itself inside a person's idea, and that this person links this idea to another idea in their life, and Nietzsche attributes that as bewilderment or confusion of causes on causes to or cause and the event of another cause to this event, and it creates a psychological alleviation for linking or connecting two different causes to one another because of the fear and trepidation of being discomfortable and uneased from this unexperienced event before. And he says, because I have Twilight the Idols next to me, and he says, to trace something unknown back to something known is alleviating, soothing, gratifying, and gives, moreover, a sense of power, an increase of the feeling of power. Not in a positive sense of increasing power, but in a an alleviating sense of mustering that brief power to stop psychologically this unknown of something.
So it's a coping mechanism of a sort.
Yes, a coping or tolerance.
Okay, so in a way, it's not a very noble way of expressing the will to power. It's still expressing the will of power because it's giving them it is an expression of it. I would imagine Nietzsche would say.
A brief source of power before continuing what he'd say a mediocre life by not facing and overcoming that challenge of this new experience. And he continues both from Twilight the Idols and Beyond Good and Evil that this human aversion to this unexplained, unexperienced event causes people to accept ideas blindly on their emotional appeal than their critical thinking of the event that's unfolding, and not before or after the event. Because after, you're struck with a source of joy and sometimes a source of dread. And the emotional appeal and attachment, he loves the emotions, but once you immediately and blindly attach yourself to this immediate certainty or absolute knowledge, there's no critical thinking involved. You've excluded that and become lazy.
Okay, I understand. I think we all do that, more or less.
Yes. Everybody confesses that. Well, publicly. Some people don't confess it.
Oh, we definitely all do that.
And Nietzsche says this develops as the casual interpretations, habits of the memory, and that's something, and not an examination of the actual causes that come to question. This is done because events that find in memory are comforting because of their familiarities. What was new, unexperienced, and strange are not valued because they don't soothe or sedate something that's overcome them, the unknown.
Okay, that makes sense. Definitely. So if because if you don't, you're not, your perspective doesn't grow, and you can't adopt new perspectives by doing, because you do that by doing new things or doing something in a different way. So if you're kind of constantly going back to your previous memories and finding it is soothing because it's familiar, but you don't grow at that point. You're not even like looking at the memory in a different way. You're just going back to the same way, trying to remember it the same way, so you get that same comfort.
While you're spontaneously, while the will is willing and impelling / acting spontaneously in your brain of the thoughts, etc., etc. Nietzsche would say, to the philosopher, it acquires in this way a series of metaphysical questions of what true questions of this conscience for the intellect. To simplify, these blunt questions are what concern for the consciousness of this intellectual person. What has bring forward to the consciousness that you think is true of yourself, or what self-knowledge is this? Because he disagrees with self-knowledge as something that's retrospective and introspective, but at the same time, it's neither. It's it's interpretive.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah.
The 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 metaphysical question, he says, whence do you take the concept thinking? Why do I believe in cause and effect? What gives me the right to speak of an I, and even an I as cause, and finally, an I as a cause of thought? We humans love self-identification to I, me, my, and mine. Everything that's self-reflective or selfish and common common sense. I just I disagree with the term common sense. I roll my eyes every time somebody says it because they don't define it. They continue saying what other people said in their form of words.
Mm.
While we have the self-identification of I, my, etc., we don't we we never evaluate nor question nor critique other people due to our pride, prejudice, and survival of our dignity, while not critiquing, evaluating, and questioning our morals, values, and philosophy.
Hmm.
And Nietzsche continues saying, whoever feels able to answer these questions in a straightaway, sort of intuitive, air quoting, knowledge, as does he say, I think and know that this at least is true and actual and certain. That's Descartes. While find a philosopher ready today with a smile and two question marks, aka the philosopher himself, Nietzsche, and people after him with a smile and questioning what, and people saying the same questions he said earlier. Do I take the concept thinking, or when do I do it? And why do I believe in such cause and effect? That's the philosopher Nietzsche himself and people after Nietzsche, aka the free spirits, with a smile and two question marks, or two questions with question marks.
Wow.
And
Okay.
he concludes it in a witful style. My dear sir, what is probable you that you are not mistaken? Why do you think you want the truth at all? I associate that as a butler approaching an aristocratic and rich person in their mansion and say, "Sir, why do you want this at all? What's the point of this?" This is Nietzsche, the butler, approaching the philosopher, saying, "Hey, man, well, I don't think this is possible if you're not mistaken. But why do you want this at all?"
Yeah. Okay. Why do you want the truth? That's a good question. Like,
He's like Batman and Joker in the Dark Knight, where Batman's interrogating the Joker. That's Nietzsche. He's interrogating everybody.
mm.
Where are they?
Yeah. Where is she?
And he continues forward, linking 17 and 16, saying that with the superstition of these logicians or logical people, I am never tired of underlining this little fact with this superstitious people, which are fear, dreading slash fearing, and he uses the word loathe with an intense hatred to confess this. And that confession is what comes to mind. Whatever comes to mind is when it wants to come to mind. Or to say what he would say, that a thought comes when it wants to, not when I want to. So that a falsification, and this fact, the subject I, is the condition of the predicate think. It thinks. But isn't this it? Precisely that old, famous I, to put it mildly, an assertion, assumption, and above all, not a immediate certainty.
Hmm.
And again, tying with the confession of, or the lack of confession, vulnerability, and timidity that that philosophers and people today who wear a mask and not want to worsen the reputation, they don't say I or it. This is Nietzsche saying, well, what is it, damn it? Is it you? Is it it? Is that it become the old I itself? Why are we on about this? And he continues forward on that this is an interpretation. You didn't will it. It overcame you. Well, people say, well, isn't that it? I? No, it's neither. We should stop thinking about those words, as Nietzsche would say, because of how common communication and language is today, and that to simplify everything, we use I, me, mine, etc., etc. And remember, every time a person says that, think that it's a selfish confession on their part, while it's a source of pleasure for them.
Okay, I see. It's
While
like
discussing themselves, it's a source of pleasure.
right, because it has a mimemic continuity, right? Like this is me. This is what I'm about. This is what I've done. Blah blah blah. This is where I go to eat, dress, and it's
Plus,
yeah.
plus with the habits of memory or system of mnemonics, again with the error, one of the four great errors in Twilight of the Idols. It's prevalent or everywhere that this system of thinking has developed. Not solely in philosophy, but in business, romantic love, and religion itself. This issue, and I'm not quoting him. This is me saying everything. The issue with this system is it excludes other descriptions and examinations, while it creates a personal blockage of preventing people to determine their causes in life.
Okay. Okay.
And once we slowly approach Aphorism 19, I think it's 19. No, it's Aphorism 21 where it's Aphorism 21 where he refutes and include Twilight of the Idols. He refutes free will.
Oh, does he? Okay.
Yes. He says it's linked with the Socratic Platonic Christian pressure that's on everybody, etc., etc., and a source of a weakness that if you have a free will, why not act upon your free will? But if you're acting upon it, why are you judged, penalized, and guilty for acting on it?
Right. Yeah. It's because it's held to be the most important thing, right? Free will,
Mm-hmm.
agency. So if you act on it, you will still be judged on things that are deemed wrong or bad.
Which includes, isn't the moral concept of guilt linked with the material concept of obligation, while retaliation is a um, retaliation is a form to stop people's freedom of will or a lack of from guilt and morality.
Hmm. That's a good point. Yeah.
That's a good point. It's true. Base.
Base.
It's base as hell.
Ah, damn.
Or even with it, or even with this it things, one has already gone too far that this it already contains what they already thought of the event and does not belong to the event itself. For it becomes a habit of grammar, and that habit of grammar is that thinking is an activity, and every activity pertains to one action, aka separating the two cause and effect, similar to the lightning flash. People say that the lightning is the cause of this action of flash as
Right.
a source of power or strength and a neutral substratum. But there's no substratum. The doer is included of the act. That doer is the will. The deed is everything, or action, function is everything.
Okay.
And the will merely is including spirit, will or spirit is accompanied to the event, but Nietzsche says that there's some events where the will isn't willed or or seen or appear.
Isn't seen or appeared to what, like an observer, like a
One not an observer, but in the action or the deed itself. That say one example, an event that either a traumatic, gruesome, or overwhelming event overcomes the person. They didn't act on the will didn't act on them. An external will acted on them. It overcame them and changed them. He says that's chance. Everything independent beyond control. So everything outside your control acted and affected on you.
it's chance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And he renames that chance fate. And one blunt example he says of fate is that your birth, you're born. That was beyond your control. It was independent and beyond your control.
Right.
You couldn't decide if you were born. And the free will, and this is where he denies free will inside a person, because the people who agree with free will, they'll say, well, yeah, I didn't decide to be born, but I came out.
That's
What?
good. Okay, that makes sense. So it's like, is there free will just sometimes? Like, why not in this particular action? Like, or result?
Continues forward that this more or less, in accordance with the same scheme that the older atomists sought, in addition with this force, air quote, force of the I or it, with that little lump of matter in which it resides out of the acts of the atom. And we said earlier that with the thing in itself, Kant loves to reduce people to an impersonal objectivity. Same with the scientists. They love unconsciously reducing everything to one source. That's familiar, correct? One source, one God.
Mm-hmm.
Is this atom their God?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Plus, this is the positive portion, where more rigorous minds at least learn to get along without this residuum of Earth or this atomistic need inside Earth, that we and the logicians as well one day accustom ourselves to getting along without this little old it, which, in all honesty, became and was evaporated into this little old I. That's aphorism 17. 18 is everything we said in 17 and 16, but that the charming of this theory, that it is refutable, that that this precisely this charm that entices subtler minds is 100 times over a refuted theory of free will, owes its continued existence to the charm alone. Again and again, there comes along someone who feels he is strong enough to refute it. You decide either or contradicting everything Nietzsche and what we said. You decide, but it's the common language and communication. If we don't say you, then who decides it? Then who's it? What's their name? Etc. Etc. And that evolved today to pronouns and neopronouns. Who's
Right.
that?
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Head
So you
scratcher.
and you head scratching, shoulder scratching, everything's itching. Why is my body boiling hot? I'm what? This is the
Honestly.
this is the this is another branch off, but this branch off is great for you decide it, including the audience, if they're a strong person to refute or justify free will. I'm saying I'm saying nothing because I've said everything in aphorisms beforehand, and while reading um the Four Great Errors. So that describes everything of me. We can alter this dialogue to, oh, Fouad, do you believe this or that? But that become pointless and using our precious time again and again. What's your thoughts from the readings today?
Um, that's a good question.
Did you write
It's
some notes?
I started to, but then I was just like, I need to listen, and it didn't. Was when I was writing, I was thinking about what I was thinking about. Then so I just stopped writing because I wanted to continue just thinking about, like, listening. Um, so so the idea about there is no free will. It so maybe is he saying in a way that what we deem as free will or experience as free will is more of a will to power? That there's internal forces and the external forces that act upon us and through us. It's not necessarily, the I, like me as a singular unit, making those
And
choices and decisions. It comes upon you and it kind of manifests through you, through your body, through your mind.
great observation. Don't use the will to power every time
Okay.
because in some contexts and description, the will to power is a self-commanding, uh, independent, and becoming a self self-legislative person, and not not in desire or dependency on another person. Now he discusses interdependency as another source of power as a source of will to power by two people collaborating and working together. But that results in one requesting favors for the other and creating a dependency, a brief dependency. What you're saying with this will, again, a collection of impulses that battle one another for the psyche, including the mind and outside the mind, and with with life itself and inside the cosmos.
Okay. Hmm. I'm pretty, confused in a certain sense. It's
It's Nietzsche.
yeah. So earlier, I think in Aphorism 16, you mentioned when someone has like intuition or intuitive knowledge is kind of like a lazy way to say that you have the like an understanding and absolute knowledge of something.
Yes, a
Okay.
lazy but facetious or uh, quickly quickly aware of what's happening to say.
Right.
Because if somebody challenges you of who you are, they're saying, "Whoa, man, why why are you saying that? I'm being offended. You're being rude to me. Don't do that, etc., etc."
Okay.
Another example is Socrates was questioning every noble person and non-noble person in Athens. Why is this source of justice, or why is this form of establishing justice and equality so beneficial to other people? But is it true that it's only beneficial to you? What is your justice? That's what Socrates would plausibly say to these affluent and noble people in the hierarchy. in Athens and outside of Athens, became the gadfly of pestering and harassing people.
Yes. Okay. So, that's a good point. So people, let's say, like, use that Socrates example. They would appeal to something transcendent as their justification. That is kind of the rules set out in the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's also unknowable in a contradictory way too.
You saying the will's unknowable? Unknowable?
Well, like I say, if the noblemen, these are, this is our traditions, this is set by, the Olympian gods or whatever. That is they like to know their reason, like they're unknowable in a certain sense for mortals. So you just kind of, you don't go beyond, it's kind of like a cop out, I guess, or being lazy.
To a degree, it's laziness of their naivety of not describing what their justice system is. But if they continued being harassed from this ugly, Socratic, from this ugly Socrates,
Mm-hmm.
they'll dismiss and or execute or ostracize a 10-year exile or ostracism of Socrates, but they didn't, which is their fault.
Right.
But in reality, Athens at the time had a weak morality in mind, which Socrates overpowered them with this questioning. And Nietzsche is attempting this reversal or revaluation of values for people by questioning what happened before him amid his time, and they'll happen after him.
Okay. So reevaluation of values.
Mm-hmm. Altering what was once that is now today perceived as good, beautiful, justice, etc. Justice and precious is to Nietzsche's eyes the weak, the poor, the needy, desperate, downtrodden, etc., etc. And he's saying we don't need all these values for these type of people. They have their values, but with these type of values, they're seen as number one. And while everything that was in the pre-moral era is now seen as number two,
Right.
so
go ahead.
this radical revaluation of values he respects because it's a form of will to power, but a spiritual will to power to repress, hinder, and control people.
Okay. So it depends on, like the pre-moral, so I'm assuming that means before Judeo-Christian values took.
Before philosophy, morality, rationality were existence.
Okay, so those values were, I guess, beneficial in fostering of a certain type of person.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas after that, the moral, the values you mentioned that benefits the poor, the weak, etc., etc. So it's a form of control of society in a certain sense, or people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really about like what is actually good or bad or evil.
It would be the opposite with the slave moralists or old moralists that they included evil and replacement to bad, while the masters while they're unconscious in their instincts, but the word bad is an afterthought, and I'd say yes, it's an afterthought, but it's included to good as a beneficiary of a healthy life. And again, the master-slave morality is a critique, not an affirmative idea to Nietzsche. His affirmative idea is to life, to fate itself inside Zarathustra, his 300 plus page poem.
Okay. It's the life itself. So, interesting.
Well, ponder these thoughts another time at your solitude and free time. Appreciate you accepting the invitation again. Everybody, there's a link in the description to the Men's Academy. Fouad and I, again, are inside the academy. It's a paid academy. And I'll see everybody next week.
Thanks for
I'm
having
more
me.
Fati. Love your fate, and you're welcome, sir.